I woke up on a Tuesday morning in October and heard my own children discussing which facility would take me fastest. I was not supposed to hear it. I had come downstairs for coffee the way I did every morning at 6, quiet in my socks on the hardwood floor of the house I had built with my own hands 41 years earlier, and I stopped in the hallway outside the kitchen because my son's voice had a shape to it I did not recognize. Not the voice he used with me, a flatter voice, a business voice. Meadowbrook has an opening on the 15th, he was saying. I already put down the deposit. My daughter's voice answered him, quieter, but not quiet enough. Does he know? He doesn't need to know yet. We tell him after we've got the paperwork lined up. Once it's signed, it's signed. You know how he gets when he thinks he has a say in something. I stood in that hallway with my coffee mug in my hand, the steam rising up past my face, and I felt something in my chest go very still, the way a lake goes still right before a storm crosses it. My name is Walter Hale. I am 68 years old. I have lived in this house on Larchmont Drive in Asheville, North Carolina, since the year my wife Ruth and I poured the foundation ourselves, mixing concrete in a rented mixer on weekends because we could not afford a contractor. My son Gregory was born in the bedroom upstairs, the one that still has his height marked in pencil on the closet doorframe, worn down now to faint gray ghosts of a boy who does not exist anymore. My daughter Patricia was born 2 years after him, in the same bedroom, because by then we trusted the midwife more than the hospital 30 minutes was away. I raised them in this house. I taught Gregory to change a tire in the driveway when he was 14. I taught Patricia to read a balance sheet at the kitchen table when she decided at 16 that she wanted to study business, because even then I understood things about money that neither of my children had ever bothered to ask me about. I have never told them what those things were. That has always been my choice. And until that Tuesday morning in October, I believed it was a choice that hurt no one. I did not walk into the kitchen. I stood in the hallway and I listened, because sometimes you do not get to choose what you overhear, and once you have heard it, pretending you have not becomes its own kind of lie. He built this house, Patricia said. Her voice had something in it I wanted to believe was hesitation. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for the fact that it's falling apart and worth less than the land it sits on, Gregory said. Pat, I had it appraised, quietly. The lot alone is worth $400,000 with the market the way it is. The house itself is a liability. Once he's settled somewhere with proper care, we list it, split the proceeds, and everybody's better off. Him included. He shouldn't be alone in a place this size at his age. And if he doesn't want to go, he won't have a choice, Pat. That's the whole point of doing the paperwork first. Guardianship review takes 6 weeks if we file now. By the time he understands what's happening, it's already happened. I want to tell you that I felt rage in that moment. I did not. I felt something colder and older than rage, something that had been waiting a long time for a reason to wake up. I set my coffee mug down on the hallway table, very carefully, the way you set down something you do not want to break. And I walked back up the stairs before either of them saw me, and I sat on the edge of my bed in the gray October light, and I thought about my wife. Ruth had been gone for 11 years. Pancreatic cancer took her in 14 weeks, from diagnosis to the morning. I held her hand in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and cut flowers and listened to a machine go quiet. In the last conversation we had while she was still fully herself, she gripped my hand with a strength that surprised me and said the thing I had carried every day since. Walter, promise me you won't tell them about the money until they've earned the right to hear it. I had asked her what she meant by earned. You know what I mean, she said. Gregory measures people by what they're worth. I don't want our son measuring his own father that way before he's had the chance to love you as just his father. Let them grieve me. Let them grow up a little more. Then decide when the time is right. You'll know it when you see it. I had promised her. I have kept that promise for 11 years, through every Christmas where Gregory checked his watch during dinner, through every birthday where Patricia called from the car on her way somewhere else, through every ordinary Tuesday when I sat in this house they believed was crumbling around a stubborn old man, and I never once let them see what was actually inside it. Because the truth is this. I do not sell hardware at the counter of Hale's Building Supply on Tunnel Road the way my children think I do, 3 days a week for something to fill my time. I own Hale's Building Supply. I own 4 more locations across 3 counties, and a distribution warehouse outside Charlotte, and a controlling stake in a regional lumber cooperative that supplies half the contractors in western North Carolina. My accountant, a sharp and quiet woman named Ines Calloway, who has worked with me for 19 years, manages a portfolio that would make my son's mortgage look like pocket change. I built all of it slowly, invisibly, the way a man builds something he intends to matter rather than something he intends to be seen. Ruth knew every dollar of it. My children know none of it. They believe the house is my only asset. Because I have let them believe that. Because Ruth asked me to wait, and because some part of me, if I am honest, was afraid of what I would learn about them if I told them too soon. I learned it anyway. I learned it standing in a hallway in my own socks. I did not go downstairs again until I heard the garage door close and Gregory's truck pull out of the driveway, off to whatever office he sat in most days, pretending to run a company that, I happened to know, had been quietly bleeding money for the better part of 2 years. I heard Patricia's car leave 10 minutes later. Then the house was silent. The particular silent of a place that has just held a conversation it was never meant to hold. And I sat alone at the kitchen table with my cold coffee and I thought about what came next. I did not think about revenge. I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories usually go, and I did not want mine to be one of them. I thought about Ruth's face in that hospital room. I thought about the promise. And I thought, for the first time in 11 years, that maybe the time she had told me I would recognize had finally arrived. Not because I was ready to give them everything, but because I was no longer willing to let them take something from me without knowing what they were actually taking it from. I called Ines Calloway that afternoon. "Walter," she said, the particular warmth in her voice of someone who has spent 19 years learning to read the silences between my sentences. "You sound different. I need you to pull every document," I said. "The trust, the property deeds, the guardianship statutes for the state, all of it. And Ines, I need to know something specific. If someone tried to file for guardianship over me without my knowledge, what would that actually require?" There was a pause on the line, the kind that told me she had already understood more than I had said. "Walter, is someone trying to do that?" "My son thinks he found a shortcut," I said. "I'd like to know exactly how short that shortcut actually is." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the flat, careful voice of a woman delivering information she knows will land hard, "It's not short at all, Walter. Not if the person in question is mentally competent, has legal counsel, and has documentation proving he's the sole owner of every asset in question. It would be laughably short if none of that were true. It is very, very long if all of it is." "Good," I said. "Then let's make sure all of it is." We spent that week building what I can only describe as a quiet fortress. Ines pulled every deed, every title, every document proving that the house in Larchmont Drive, and every business bearing the Hale name, belonged to me alone, held in a trust. Ruth and I had established together 14 years earlier, long before either of my children had any reason to think about what their father actually owned. She connected me with an elder law attorney named Desmond Okafor, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with reading glasses perched low on his nose, and a manner so calm it made the panic in my chest feel almost embarrassing by comparison. "Mr. Hale," he said, in our first meeting, in an office that smelled like old paper and good coffee, "I want you to understand something clearly before we go any further. What your son is describing, filing for guardianship over a competent adult without that adult's knowledge, based on an assumption of incapacity that no doctor has ever documented, is not a shortcut. It is, in most cases I have seen, either a catastrophic misunderstanding of how the law works or an attempt at something considerably darker. Which do you believe it is?" I thought about the flat business voice I had heard through my kitchen wall, the voice that said he doesn't need to know yet, the voice that had already priced my house before he had asked me a single question about how I felt about leaving it. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I intend to find out." Desmond nodded slowly. the nod of a man who has watched a great many families come apart over exactly this kind of quiet arithmetic. Then let's make sure that whatever he tries it against a wall he doesn't know is there. Over the following 2 weeks, while Gregory and Patricia went about their lives believing I remained exactly the man they had always assumed I was, an aging widower puttering around a house too big for him, selling paint and lumber part-time at a counter he did not need to stand behind, I quietly assembled the evidence of who I actually was. Desmond filed a preemptive competency affidavit, backed by a full evaluation from my longtime physician, Dr. Reina Alvarez, who has known me for 22 years and looked at me over her glasses when I explained why I needed the paperwork and said only, "Walter, you could run 3 companies blindfolded. Let's get this done properly so nobody ever gets to ask that question again." Ines restructured nothing about the trust itself. It was already ironclad, but she prepared a full accounting, current to the day, of every asset that bore my name and mine alone, ready to be produced the instant anyone questioned my capacity or my ownership. And I began, carefully, to watch. I did not confront Gregory. Not yet. I wanted to understand the shape of what he had built before I decided how to answer it, and, in watching, I learned things that hurt considerably more than the plan for Meadowbrook ever had. I learned, through a conversation I was not meant to overhear at Patricia's house during a Sunday dinner I had nearly declined to attend, that Gregory's business, a mid-sized commercial contracting firm he had built his entire identity around, the firm he had once told me, with real pride in his voice, that he had built without a dime of my help, had in fact been quietly financed at its founding by a loan I had co-signed 9 years earlier and had never once mentioned to anyone, because Ruth had asked me, before she died, to let him believe he had done it alone. I had kept that promise, too. I had watched him accept awards from the local Chamber of Commerce, watched him tell reporters he was a self-made man, and I had said nothing, because his mother had wanted him to have the dignity of believing it was true. Now that same self-made man was 2 years behind on payments to the very bank that held that original loan, was facing a lawsuit from a supplier in Charlotte over an unpaid invoice north of $80,000, and was, according to the numbers Ines was able to quietly pull through channels available to her as my accountant and nothing more, roughly 4 months from insolvency. The $400,000 from the sale of my house was not, I understood now, a kindness he intended to offer me in the form of better care. It was a lifeline he intended to throw himself, dressed up as concern for his aging father. I sat with that knowledge for 3 days before I told Desmond. "It changes the picture," he said carefully. "Not the law, but the picture. Desperation makes people move faster than caution usually allows. I'd expect him to accelerate the guardianship filing rather than slow it down." "Then let him," I said. "Let's see how fast he can move toward a wall he doesn't know is there." He filed within the week. I received, through Desmond's network of contacts in the county clerk's office, a copy of the guardianship petition on the same afternoon it was submitted. Gregory Hale, petitioning the court for guardianship of the person and estate of Walter Hale, citing, among other things, increasing forgetfulness, unfaced living conditions, and a pattern of behavior suggesting diminished capacity to manage his own financial affairs. He had attached, as supporting evidence, 3 photographs of my kitchen with dishes in the sink, a printout of an overdue library book notice, and a statement from a neighbor, a woman named Carol Fenwick, 2 doors down, whom I had spoken to perhaps 4 times in a decade, claiming she had, quote, "noticed Walter seeming confused lately." I sat at my kitchen table and read the petition twice. Then I laughed once, a short bitter sound that surprised me because the alternative to laughing felt considerably worse, diminished capacity. I had closed on the acquisition of the Charlotte warehouse 8 months earlier with a level of due diligence that had impressed even Ines, who does not impress easily. I had, 3 weeks before that petition landed on my kitchen table, personally negotiated a supplier contract that saved Hale's building supply 11% on lumber costs across 5 locations. Somewhere in my son's mind, the father who had done both of those things had become interchangeable with a confused old man forgetting library books, because it was more useful to him that way. He's given us everything we need. Desmond said when I called him. A petition built on nothing more than dirty dishes and hearsay is not going to survive contact with a full competency evaluation and a certified accounting of assets he clearly had no idea existed. But Walter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Go ahead. Do you want to fight this quietly, through the court, and let the paperwork simply collapse before it ever reaches a judge? Or do you want your children to understand, fully and at once, exactly what they attempted to do and exactly who they attempted to do it to? I thought about Gregory's voice through the kitchen wall. Once it's signed, it's signed. You know how he gets when he thinks he has a say in something. There's a family gathering in 3 weeks, I said slowly, the idea arriving the way ideas sometimes do, fully formed and already certain. Patricia's oldest is graduating from nursing school. Gregory already told me he's hosting a dinner at his house to celebrate. Half the extended family will be there. His business partners too, I'd imagine, since he never misses a chance to network at his own dinner table. And you want to be there, Desmond said. I want to be there, I said, when the truth arrives. Not quietly, not through a letter. I want my son standing in the middle of a room full of people whose good opinion he has spent his whole life chasing, when he finds out exactly how wrong he was about who he thought I was. Desmond was quiet for a moment. That's not the law's job, Walter. The law will do its job regardless. But I understand wanting the moment to mean something more than paperwork. It's not about the paperwork, I said. It's about 15 years of him deciding I wasn't worth asking. I want him to understand, in front of the people he cares most about impressing, exactly what he decided not to ask about. I spent the following weeks preparing in a way my children would never have recognized, because it did not look like preparation. I still went to the store 3 days a week. I still waved at Carol Fenwick over the fence and said nothing about her statement, though I confess it cost me something not to. I still let Patricia call from her car and Gregory check his watch at the one dinner we shared during those weeks. A Sunday meal at his house where he mentioned, almost in passing, that he had been looking into some options for me and watched my face carefully while he said it, and found nothing there but the same tired patience I had shown him for years. He had no idea he was watching a man who already knew everything. Behind that patience, Eanes and Desmond and I built something precise. We prepared a full accounting of every asset I owned, current and notarized. We prepared the guardianship petition's collapse point by point, Dr. Alvarez's competency evaluation, 3 separate character references from business associates who had worked with me for over a decade, a detailed rebuttal to every claim in Gregory's filing, including a photograph, dated and time-stamped, of my kitchen fully clean. Taken the same week the photograph in his petition had allegedly been captured, proving the image he had submitted to the court was staged or misrepresented. We prepared, at my specific request, a single folder that I intended to hand to no one but Gregory himself, containing the original loan documents from 9 years earlier, the ones bearing my signature as co-signer on the loan that had built his company, the company he had told a room full of reporters he built entirely alone. And I asked Eunice to do one more thing. I asked her to quietly arrange for 6 of my most senior colleagues, the general managers of each Hales building supply location, along with my warehouse operations director and my head of finance, to be present, without explanation, at Gregory's house on the evening of the graduation dinner. I told her to have them arrive together in the company vehicles that carried the Hales building supply logo on the doors at exactly 7:30, the hour Gregory had told me dinner would be served. You want them to arrive as a group, Eunice said, understanding immediately, the way she always did. As a statement, I want my son to understand, all at once, in front of everyone he wants to impress, precisely how large the thing is that he assumed did not exist, I said. 15 years, Eunice. 15 years of my own son deciding I was not worth the conversation. I have earned the right to let the answer arrive the way I choose. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said gently, Walter, are you certain this is what Ruth would have wanted? I sat with that question longer than I sat with almost anything else during those 3 weeks. I thought about Ruth in the hospital bed, her hand gripping mine, asking me to wait until they had earned the right to know, until they had grown up a little more. I thought about whether what I was planning was justice or simply a wound dressed up as one. In the end, I decided something that I still believe, sitting here now telling you this story. Ruth had asked me to wait until the moment was right. She had never asked me to protect them from the truth forever, and she had certainly never asked me to let my son take my home out from under me while calling it kindness. The waiting was over. What came next was not revenge. It was the truth. Finally arriving at the only door that had ever refused to let it in, the graduation dinner was set for a Saturday evening in early November. I put on the one good jacket I owned, a navy blazer Ruth had bought me for our 40th anniversary, that I had worn perhaps 4 times since her death, and I drove myself to my son's house, in the same truck I had driven for 11 years. The truck Gregory had once suggested gently that I should probably stop driving before I embarrassed myself in it. I had no idea, walking up that driveway with a graduation card in my hand, that I was about to watch 15 years of careful invisibility collapse in the space of a single evening, and that by the time the last car pulled out of that driveway, my son would understand, for the first time in his adult life, exactly whose house he had been standing in all along. The evening had already filled with people by the time I let myself in through the front door. Gregory's front door, though I had helped him with the down payment on this house 11 years ago, in a way he had never known about either. A fact I carried into that room along with everything else. The house smelled like roasted chicken and candle wax, and the particular perfume of a party trying hard to look effortless. Patricia's oldest, my granddaughter Willow, stood near the fireplace in a pale green dress, her nursing school diploma framed and propped on the mantel behind her, laughing at something one of her cousins had said. She saw me first and crossed the room fast, arms already open. Grandpa Walter. She hugged me the way she had hugged me since she was small, without calculation, without the careful management I had grown used to from her father. "I'm so glad you came. Wouldn't have missed it," I said, and meant it entirely. Because whatever was about to happen to her father in this room, none of it was hers to carry. Gregory found me a few minutes later, moving through the crowd with the particular ease of a man working a room he believes he owns. He wore a crisp gray button-down, his hair combed the way it always was for occasions that mattered to him, and he clapped a hand on my shoulder with a warmth that, knowing what I now knew, felt like a performance being rehearsed for an audience of one, and that audience was not me. "Dad, glad you made it. You look sharp." He glanced past me toward the kitchen, already calculating who needed greeting next. "Denise from my office is here, and the Hartmans. You remember Bill Hartman? He's been talking about doing business with the store." "I remember," I said. Bill Hartman ran a competing hardware chain 2 counties over. Gregory had spent years quietly trying to court him for something. A partnership, an acquisition. I had never been entirely sure, and it had never once occurred to Gregory that I might have opinions about a competitor circling my own business. Because it had never occurred to him that it was my business at all, Patricia found me by the drink table, her youngest balanced on one hip, and pressed a glass of sparkling cider into my hand with the tired, distracted affection of a woman juggling several roles at once. "You doing okay, Dad? You've been quiet lately. I've had a lot on my mind," I said, and she nodded without asking what. The way she had nodded through 100 conversations over the years without asking what was actually behind my silences, and I did not hold it against her in that moment, because I understood, watching her shift her son to her other hip, that she was tired in a way that made curiosity a luxury she rarely had time for. It did not excuse what her brother had built. It simply made her a different kind of participant in it. Not the architect, but not entirely innocent either. Because she had known enough that Tuesday morning to ask it, "Does he know?" And she had let the answer be no. Anyway, the dinner unfolded the way these dinners do. Toasts were raised to Willow and her diploma. Gregory stood at the head of the table and gave a speech about hard work and dedication that I listened to with a strange, distant calm, because I recognized, watching him speak with such confidence about earning things, that I was about to watch the floor open up beneath a man who had built his entire self-image on a foundation he did not know I had poured. I checked my watch at 7:28. 2 minutes. I had not told Desmond or Enos the exact hour I planned to act, only the day, because I wanted the choice of moment to belong entirely to me, the way so little else in that house had belonged to me for the past 2 weeks. I set down my cider glass. I stood from the table, and Gregory glanced over, mild curiosity crossing his face, the look of a man checking whether his father needed help finding the bathroom. "I have something I'd like to say," I said. Before dessert, the table quieted, the particular quiet of a room accustomed to Gregory being the one who commanded attention, adjusting to the novelty of his father asking for it instead. I looked at my son, and then at my daughter, and then briefly at Willow, whose diploma sat framed on the mantel behind all of us, the reason we were supposedly gathered here at all. 15 days ago, I said. I stood in the hallway outside my own kitchen and heard my son tell my daughter that he had already put a deposit down on a nursing home bed for me, that he intended to file paperwork behind my back to have me declared incapable of managing my own affairs, that once it was signed, it would be too late for me to have a say. The room did not move. Gregory's face had gone the particular color of a man watching a door he thought was locked swing slowly open. "Dad," he started. I'm not finished," I said, and something in my voice, some register I had not used with him in a very long time, made him stop. "I heard you say the house was worth $400,000 as a lot, and worth nothing at all as a home. I heard you call it a liability. I want you to know that I have spent the past 2 weeks finding out exactly why you needed that $400,000 so badly that you were willing to have your own father declared incompetent to get it." I reached into my jacket and withdrew the folder Enos had prepared, the one I had carried against my chest the entire drive over, the way I imagine other men might carry something considerably more fragile. "Your company is 4 months from insolvency, Gregory. You're being sued by a supplier in Charlotte for $81,000 you haven't paid. And the loan that financed your company 9 years ago, the one you told a reporter from the Asheville paper you built without a dime of anyone's help, that loan has my signature on it. I co-signed it. I have kept that secret for 9 years because your mother asked me to let you have the dignity of believing you'd done it alone." I set the folder on the table in front of him. Bill Hartman, 3 seats down, had gone very still, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. Denise from Gregory's office was staring at her plate as if it might offer an escape route. "You didn't need to sell my house because I was a burden, Gregory," I said. "You needed to sell my house because you were drowning, and it was easier to drown me quietly than to admit to your own father that you needed help. That's not." His voice cracked on the second word, the polish gone entirely now, and for a moment I saw underneath it something that looked almost like the boy who used to follow me around the hardware store on Saturday mornings, asking why the lumber was stacked the way it was, before ambition had taught him that curiosity toward me was a waste of time. "Dad, I was going to tell you eventually. I thought if I could just get things stable first, you were going to have me declared incapable," I said, "and sell my house without my knowledge, and you thought that was a more respectable plan than simply telling your father you were in trouble and asking for help." The doorbell rang. Gregory flinched at the sound the way a man flinches at a sound he cannot yet place but already fears. I did not flinch because I had been waiting for it. I glanced at my watch. 7:30 precisely. "That will be for me," I said, and walked to the front door myself. Past Gregory's frozen face, Patricia's hand pressed over her mouth, past a room full of people who had come to celebrate a granddaughter's diploma and had instead wandered into the middle of something none of them had been prepared for. I opened the door onto 6 people standing on the porch in the cold November air, each of them wearing the navy polo shirts embroidered with the Hales Building Supply logo, the same logo painted on the doors of the 2 company trucks parked now at careful angles along the curb, headlights still on, illuminating the whole scene in flat white light. Marisol Ortega, who had managed my flagship location on Tunnel Road for 11 years. Deshaun Price, who ran operations at the Charlotte warehouse and had 3 months earlier personally walked me through a logistics restructuring that saved the company close to $200,000 annually. My head of finance, a meticulous, soft-spoken man named Arthur Lindqvist, who had been with me since the second store opened. 3 others, general managers of my remaining locations, all of them people who had spent years working for a man they knew with absolute certainty was not the quiet part-time counter clerk his own children believed him to be. "Mr. Hale," Marisol said, and there was warmth in her voice, and something else beneath it, a kind of quiet pride that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. "We got Inez's message. She said you might want us here tonight." Behind me, I heard the room go entirely silent. The particular silence offered people simultaneously trying to reconcile what they were seeing with everything they thought they understood about the evening. I turned back toward the dining room, where Gregory stood now at the head of the table, one hand braced against the back of his chair, his face the color of old paper. "Everyone," I said, stepping aside so the doorway framed all 6 of them clearly, "I'd like you to meet the people who helped me run Hale's building supply, along with the warehouse outside Charlotte, and the lumber cooperative that supplies most of the contractors in this part of the state." I let that settle for a moment before I continued. "I don't sell paint at the counter 3 days a week because I need something to fill my time, Gregory. I own 5 stores, a distribution warehouse, and a controlling stake in a cooperative that does business with roughly 60% of the contractors in this region, including, I believe, several of the people your firm has worked with. I have owned all of it for longer than Willow has been alive." Bill Hartman set down his fork very slowly. "Walter Hale," he said, something dawning in his face that had clearly been circling for a moment without landing. You're the Hale on the cooperative board. I've been trying to get a meeting with you for 2 years through channels, and you're sitting at your own son's dinner table." "I am," I said, "and you'll forgive me for not mentioning it sooner. I wasn't in the habit of announcing myself at family dinners. I preferred to be Gregory's father here, not a business contact. That was a courtesy I extended to my son. I'm not certain, given the events of the past 3 weeks, that it was a courtesy he extended back." Gregory had not moved. His hand was still braced against the chair, his knuckles pale against the dark wood. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost every trace of the smooth confidence he had carried through his toast 20 minutes earlier. "You let me think." He stopped, started again. "All these years, you let me think you were just. I let you think what you wanted to think," I said, "because you never once asked me what I actually did with my days, Gregory. Not once, in 15 years. You assumed, and I let the assumption stand, and I understand now that this was a mistake on my part, because it allowed you to build an entire plan to take my home away from me on the foundation of not really knowing your own father at all." Willow, standing near the mantel with her diploma behind her, had tears standing in her eyes, though whether from shock or grief or something else entirely I could not tell in that moment. Patricia had gone to stand beside her daughter, one arm around her, her face turned toward her brother with an expression I had never seen her wear before. Not quite anger, not quite betrayal, something closer to the particular sorrow of watching a person you love be revealed as someone you did not fully know. "You knew," Gregory said suddenly, turning toward his sister. "You knew about the loan. You had to have. I knew nothing." Patricia said, sharp now, the tiredness gone from her voice entirely. "I knew you were planning to move Dad out. I told you that morning I didn't like it. You told me it was already handled. I let you handle it because I trusted you, Gregory, the way I've trusted you my whole life. And now I'm standing in your dining room, finding out our father owns half the hardware stores in 3 counties, and you tried to have him declared incompetent so you could sell his house to cover your own debts." The room had the particular stillness of a held breath. I looked at my son, this man who had once fallen asleep against my shoulder on long car rides, who had once asked me 100 questions a day about how things worked, who had somewhere in the last 15 years decided that his father's inner life was not worth the effort of asking about, and I felt something that was not quite triumph and not quite grief, but some complicated country that bordered both. "I have a folder for you," I said, and picked up the one still lying on the table, the loan documents with my signature on them, the accounting Inez had prepared, the competency evaluation from Dr. Alvarez. I handed it to him directly, and his hands were shaking when he took it. Everything you need is in there. My attorney has already filed a formal response to your guardianship petition. It will not survive contact with the evidence in that folder, Gregory. I want you to understand that clearly. This is not a threat. It is simply a fact. The house is mine. It has always been mine. It will remain mine for as long as I choose to live in it, which, given everything I have just learned about how little you trust me, may be considerably longer than you were hoping. Dad, please, His voice broke entirely now. And for the first time that evening I saw something in his face that was not calculation, not the smooth performance of a man managing a room. It was simply fear, and beneath the fear, something rawer, something that looked almost like the boy in the hardware store again, finally understanding the size of the thing he had tried to move. I'm not finished with you, Gregory, I said, quieter now, because the anger that had carried me this far had begun unexpectedly to give way to something heavier. But I am finished for tonight. Your daughter has a diploma on that mantle that deserves better than this evening turning entirely into a referendum on her father's failures. I suggest we let her have that much, at least. I turned to Marisol and the others still standing in the doorway, the cold air drifting past them into the warm house. Thank you for coming. I mean that. I'll see you all Monday. I stayed another 20 minutes, long enough to hug Willow properly and tell her, with complete sincerity, how proud I was of her, how proud her grandmother would have been. Long enough to eat a slice of the cake that had been meant to celebrate something entirely different than what the evening had become. Then I put on my jacket and I drove home alone in my old truck, down streets I had driven 1,000 times, back to the house that had never, not for one single day of its existence, belonged to anyone but me. I did not sleep much that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off, the way I sometimes had in the years right after Ruth died, and I thought about the promise I had made her, and whether I had kept it or broken it, or simply carried it as far as it could reasonably go before the truth demanded its own accounting. I thought I would feel lighter, having finally said the thing I had waited 15 years to say. Instead, I felt the particular exhaustion of a man who has just watched something necessary happen and found no comfort in the necessity of it. My phone rang at nearly midnight. Gregory's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered. Dad. His voice was wrecked, thin, nothing at all like the voice I had heard through my kitchen wall 3 weeks earlier. I don't know what to say to you. I don't know where to even start. Start with why, I said. Not the money, Gregory. I understand the money. Start with why you thought the answer to being in trouble was to take something from me instead of asking me for help. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I thought for a moment he had hung up. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller than I had heard it since he was a boy. Because I didn't think you'd help me, he said. I don't know what I thought. I thought you'd judge me. I thought admitting I was drowning would prove everything I was afraid you already believed about me, that I wasn't as capable as you were, that I'd never built anything real on my own. And then when Meadowbrook came up as an option for you, it started to feel like a solution to 2 problems at once, and I told myself it was for your own good, and I think some part of me knew that wasn't entirely true, and I let myself believe it anyway because it was easier than facing what was actually happening to my company. I sat with that for a long moment, the kitchen dark around me, the house creaking the way old houses do when they settle into the cold of a November night. You could have asked me, I said. 15 years, Gregory. And you never once asked me a single real question about who I was or what I did with my time, because you'd already decided the answer wasn't worth knowing. That's the part that sits heaviest with me tonight, not the money. Not even the guardianship filing, though God knows that was a cruelty I didn't expect from you. It's that you built an entire plan to remove me from my own life without once considering that the man you were removing might have been able to help you, if you'd simply trusted him enough to ask. I know, he said, and I heard something break in his voice again, quieter this time, worn down rather than sharp. I know, Dad. I don't know how to fix 15 years in one phone call. You don't, I said. You don't fix it in one phone call. You fix it, if it can be fixed at all, the same way anything worth having gets built. Slowly, with your hands over a long time, doing the work even when no one's watching to give you credit for it. I built 5 stores that way. I can tell you it's the only method that ever actually holds. He was quiet for a while after that, and I let the quiet sit, because some silences need room to become something rather than being filled too quickly. Can I come by tomorrow? He finally asked. Not to talk about the business, not about any of it. Just can I come by and see you, as your son, nothing else. I thought about Ruth and the promise, and the 15 years that had led to this particular midnight phone call, and I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I was not yet ready to say no to him, even now, even after everything. Come by around 10, I said. I'll make coffee. Okay, he said. Okay. Thank you, Dad. I ended the call and sat a while longer in the dark kitchen, turning the folder Enes had prepared over in my mind, not the physical folder, which now sat somewhere on my son's dining room table, but the shape of everything it represented, 15 years of silence finally breaking open into something that might, if we were both careful and both honest, become an actual relationship rather than the careful performance we had both been giving each other for so long. I did not know yet whether Gregory would become the son who showed up, slowly and steadily, the way real repair actually requires, or whether tonight would simply become another story he told himself about intentions that never quite turned into action. I did not know yet what would happen with the guardianship petition, though Desmond assured me the following week that it had been formally withdrawn before it ever reached a judge. The moment Gregory's own attorney reviewed the folder and understood exactly how thoroughly it would have collapsed under any real scrutiny. I did know one thing. Sitting there in the dark, my hand resting on the kitchen table Ruth and I had built together 40 years earlier, I knew that whatever came next between my son and me, it would happen with both of us finally seeing each other clearly, for the first time in longer than either of us wanted to admit, and I knew that the house, my house, the one I had poured the foundation for with my own hands, the one no guardianship filing, and no quiet appraisal, and no desperate son's calculation had managed to take from me, would still be standing here in the morning, exactly as it always had been, waiting to see what we would build on top of everything that had just been broken open. Gregory came the next morning at 10 exactly, the way he had told me he would, and I watched him from the kitchen window as he sat in his truck in the driveway for nearly a full minute before he came inside, both hands still on the wheel, the particular stillness of a man gathering himself before a conversation he has been dreading. When he finally walked in, he looked as though he had not slept either. The same rumpled shirt from the night before, dark circles under his eyes, none of the polish he usually wore like armor. I brought this, he said, and set a small cardboard box on the kitchen table. Inside it, I found, when I looked, was every document related to the guardianship petition, the original filing, the photographs, Carol Fenwick's statement, all of it, along with a handwritten note from Gregory's own attorney, confirming the withdrawal had been filed that morning before 8. I wanted you to see it destroyed, not just told about it. I wanted you to know I wasn't going to make you take my word for anything ever again if I could help it. I looked at the box for a long moment, then at my son, standing in the kitchen where he had eaten 10,000 breakfasts as a boy, looking now like a man considerably older than his 41 years. Sit down, Gregory, I said, and poured 2 cups of coffee, and we sat at the table together the way we had not sat together, just the two of us, in longer than I could easily remember. He told me things that morning I had not expected to hear. He told me about the 2 years of quiet panic running the business, the invoices he had started paying late, the nights he had lain awake calculating exactly how many more months he had before the whole structure came down around him. He told me he had gone to a financial advisor 8 months earlier who had suggested, gently, that he consider bankruptcy and how the word had frightened him so badly he had walked out of the meeting and never gone back, because bankruptcy felt, to him, like a public confirmation of every fear he carried about not being enough, not smart enough, not capable enough, not the kind of man his father was, though he had spent his whole life having no real idea what kind of man his father actually was, because he had never once bothered to ask. I used to think you didn't respect me, he said, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table. Growing up, I used to think if I just built something big enough, something impressive enough, you'd finally look at me the way you looked at the store or the customers, or, I don't know. I always felt like I was competing with something I couldn't see, and I think somewhere along the way, competing with a version of you I made up in my own head became more important to me than actually knowing the real one. I thought about that for a long time before I answered, because it was not a small thing he had said, and it deserved more than a quick reply. Your mother used to tell me I made a mistake, I said finally, keeping the business quiet from you and your sister the way I did. She thought I was protecting you both from something. Money changes how people see each other, Gregory. It changed how people saw me when I was young and had none, and then it changed again when I started to have some. I didn't want either of you measuring me by it or measuring yourselves against it. I thought I was giving you room to become your own men and women, not standing in your shadow, not resting on mine. I understand now that instead of giving you room, I might have simply given you a version of me that was easier to dismiss. A man behind a counter, selling paint 3 days a week for something to do. It's hard to respect a man you think has done nothing with his life. I think, without meaning to, I built that misunderstanding myself, brick by brick, the same way I built the stores. Gregory's eyes were wet, and he did not wipe them away this time, the way he had at the dinner the night before. I don't want to be the man who tried to put his father in a nursing home to cover a debt, he said quietly. I have to live with having been that man for a few weeks. I don't know how to undo that. You don't undo it, I said, echoing what I had told him on the phone the night before, because it was still the truest thing I knew. You build something different next to it, slowly, and eventually the new thing is bigger than the old one, even though the old one never entirely disappears. That's not me being cruel, Gregory. That's just how it actually works. I know, because I've spent 11 years building something next to the hole your mother left, and the hole is still there. But it's not the only thing there anymore. We sat together a long while after that, not always talking, sometimes simply drinking coffee in the quiet kitchen, while the November light came up gray and steady through the window over the sink, the same window Ruth used to stand at doing dishes while she watched him and Patricia play in the backyard as children. Before he left, he asked if he could come by again the following Sunday. And the Sunday after that, not for any particular reasons, just to be in the house, and I told him yes, and I meant it, though I told him plainly that yes did not mean forgiveness had already arrived in full, only that I was willing to let him show me over time, rather than simply tell me, what kind of man he intended to become from here. Patricia called 2 days later, her voice thick with an apology she had clearly been rehearsing. I should have told you the moment I heard him say it, she said. I told myself I'd talk him out of it quietly, that I didn't need to involve you in something that might not even happen. I was wrong, Dad. I let you find out by accident, standing in a hallway, when you should have heard it from me directly. The moment I knew. You're not the one who filed the paperwork, Patricia, I said, but you're right that you could have warned me. I'd like you to trust me enough, going forward, not to protect me from difficult conversations by keeping me out of them. I've had enough of being protected from things that were, in the end, entirely about me. She agreed, and in the weeks that followed, she made good on it in small, consistent ways. A phone call simply to talk, not to update me on her schedule and get off quickly. A Sunday afternoon spent at my kitchen table helping me sort through some of Ruth's old things I had never quite found the courage to go through alone, both of us crying more than either of us expected to, over a box of birthday cards and a faded photograph of Ruth pregnant with Gregory, laughing at something outside the frame. As for Gregory's business, I want to be honest about what happened there, because I think the honest version matters more than a tidy one. I did not simply hand him $400,000 to cover his debts, the way the plan he had built for himself might once have provided, if he had simply asked instead of scheming. That would have solved the immediate crisis and taught him nothing at all, and Ines agreed with me entirely on this point, in the careful unsentimental way she agrees with the decisions she thinks are actually wise. Instead, I asked Ines and Arthur Lindqvist to sit down with Gregory over a series of meetings that autumn, going through his company's finances line by line, the way I would have gone through them for any business I was considering investing in, because that is, in the end, exactly what this was. We found in that process that the business itself was not fundamentally broken. Gregory was, whatever else was true about him, genuinely skilled at winning contracts and managing crews. The failure was almost entirely in the finances, years of undisciplined spending, expansion he could not actually afford, decisions made to look successful rather than to be sound. I extended him a loan, properly documented this time, at a real interest rate with real terms, co-signed openly rather than quietly, with Arthur assigned to review his books quarterly for the next 3 years, not as a punishment, but as the kind of structure a man builds when he is finally ready to be honest about needing one. This isn't a gift, I told him. The day we signed the paperwork in Desmond's office, sunlight coming through the tall windows onto the polished table between us. This is a loan from your father, who happens to also be a businessman who believes you're capable of running this company well if you're finally willing to run it. Honestly, if you fail to make a payment, I will treat you exactly as I would treat any other borrower. I am not doing this because you are my son. I am doing it because I have looked at your numbers, and I believe in what you've built, underneath the mess you made of managing it. Gregory looked at the paperwork for a long moment, then at me, and something in his face settled in a way I had not seen since he was young enough to still ask me questions freely, before ambition had taught him that vulnerability toward his father was a currency he could not afford to spend. "Thank you," he said, "not just for the loan, for treating me like someone worth investing in, instead of someone you just needed to rescue. Those aren't always different things," I said, "but I take your point. The nursing home, the one with the deposit already down, released the payment back to Gregory's account within the week, once his attorney formally withdrew the reservation along with the guardianship petition. I never did learn precisely what conversation Gregory had with Carol Fenwick about the statement she had given, though I noticed, the following spring, that she had stopped waving at me over the fence entirely, and I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I did not particularly mind. The following June, 7 months after that November dinner, Gregory hosted another gathering at his house. Smaller this time, no diploma on the mantel, just a Sunday cookout for the family, the kind of ordinary occasion that would have been unremarkable a year earlier, and now felt, to me, like something close to a small miracle. I stood in his backyard with a plate of grilled chicken, watching him teach his youngest nephew how to throw a football, patient in a way I had not seen from him in years, and Patricia came to stand beside me, following my gaze. "He calls me now," she said, "just to talk. Not to complain about deadlines or ask if I've heard from you. Just to talk. It's strange having my brother back like this. I didn't realize how much I'd missed him until he started showing up again. I thought about the folder I had handed him at that dinner table, the loan papers we had signed since, the quarterly reviews with Arthur, that Gregory, to his credit, had attended without complaint every single time, the Sunday visits that had become, slowly and without either of us announcing it, simply part of the rhythm of both our weeks. I thought about Ruth and the promise and whether I had honored it or broken it, and I decided, standing in my son's backyard in the June sunlight, that perhaps the promise had never really been about hiding the truth forever. Perhaps it had simply been about waiting until the truth could do more good than harm, and that the only way to know that moment had arrived was to live long enough and watch closely enough to recognize it when it finally came. I still work the counter 3 days a week at the Tunnel Road location, though Gregory knows now exactly why I own it, and stops by sometimes on his lunch break, not to check on the business, just to sit with me for 20 minutes and talk about nothing in particular. The house on Larchmont Drive is still standing exactly where Ruth and I built it. The foundation we poured ourselves still holding steady beneath everything that has happened since, and beneath everything, I suspect, that is still to come. I never did sell it. I never intend to. It is not the $400,000 like sitting inside those walls that makes them worth keeping. It is everything the walls have already held, and everything I am still hoping they will hold. If my children and I keep doing the slow, unglamorous work of actually knowing each other one honest Sunday at a time. If you see yourself in Gregory, hear this from a father who has lived both sides of it. Ask the people who love you what they actually carry before you decide, on their behalf, what they're capable of understanding. You may find, the way my son did, that the person you assumed had nothing left to offer had been quietly building something worth asking about all along. And if you see yourself in me, in the quiet keeping, the careful waiting, the promise held so tightly it nearly cost me the chance to be truly known by my own children, I am asking you gently to reconsider how long silence is worth protecting. Love that hides too much of itself, even with the best of intentions, can start to look, from the outside, indistinguishable from distance. I have come to believe that the truth, offered honestly and in its own time, is very rarely the thing that breaks a family. It is far more often the last, best chance to save one. If this story moved something in you, tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you longest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe to this channel, because what comes next, I promise you, is worth staying for. Thank you, from the bottom of this old man's heart, for walking this road with me until the very end. The stories on this channel are works of fiction crafted to illuminate something true about the human experience. If this is not the kind of content you are seeking, we wish you well and hope you find exactly what you need elsewhere.